Good afternoon, Sir Michael Pabustan. I am Angelo Miguel ABALOS. I am about to report forms of oxygen and characteristics used in an aircraft. The importance of oxygen to sustain life in aircraft. The human body is dependent on the oxygen as the altitude increases. The, cons- the consequent decrease in pressure reduces the amount of oxygen the human body can absorb when breathing. To enable flight at high altitudes, either the aircraft cabin has to pressurize to, to replicate the pressure at lower altitude, or the occupants of the aircraft have to be given supplemental oxygen. At the cruising level commonly flown by the commercial air transport aircraft, loses pressurization can quickly lead to incapacitation the higher altitude. The lower at the time use consciousness. Descriptions. The describes the system on board commercial transform aircraft designed to supply supplemental oxygen to crew and passengers when required to sustain life. Oxygen systems are designed to store or to generate a supply of pure oxygen, regulate, dilute as required, then distribute that oxygen to crew or passengers. Oxygen systems are installed in military aircraft and in most commercial and business aircraft types, depending upon the types and role of the aircraft concerned. The oxygen systems may be used for normal operations to provide supplemental oxygen for specific situations or for provision of emergency oxygen in the event of smoke, fire, fumes, or loss of pressurization. Regulations. National regulations for provision and useful supplemental or emergency oxygen systems are based on guidance provided in Annex 6 of the International Civil Aviation Organization or ICAO standards and recommended practices or SARPS. In general terms, guidance first differentiates between pressurized and non-pressurized aircraft, then provides special requirements based on the altitude at which flight is be conducted. Some of the more salient items found in the ICAO guidance on oxygen are as follows. All aircraft, an operator should ensure and passengers are made familiar with the location and use of the oxygen dispensing equipment if the provision of oxygen for the use of passengers is prescribed. Non-pressurized aircraft. An airplane intended to be operated at a flight altitude at which the atmospheric pressure is less than HPA. See the note 1 in personnel compartments should be equipped with oxygen storage and dispensing apparatus. A flight to be operated at the flight altitude which the atmospheric pressure in personnel compartments will be less than 700 HPA should be commenced unless sufficient stored breathing oxygen is carried to supply all crew members and 10% of the passengers for any period in excess of 30 minutes. That pressure in compartments occupied by them will be between 700 HPA and 620 HPA. The crew and the passengers for any period that the atmospheric pressure in compartments occupied by them will be less than 620 HPA. Pressurized aircraft. An aeroplane intended to be operated at a flight altitude which the atmospheric pressure is less than 376 HPA, or which if operated at a flight altitude which the atmospheric pressure is more than 376 HPA cannot descend safely within 4 minutes to flight altitude at the atmospheric pressure is equal to 620 HPA shall be provided with automatically deployable oxygen equipment. The total number of oxygen dispensing units shall exceeds the number of passengers and cabin crew seats at the least 10%. All flight crew members of pressurized airplanes operating above an altitude where atmospheric pressure is less than 376 HPA shall have available at the flight duty station a quick donning type of oxygen mask which will readily supply oxygen upon demand. Equipment flight deck. Oxygen for use of the flight deck occupants is normally stored as pressurized gas. One or more tanks or cylinders in certain types. Oxygen is stored as a liquid or LOX. The total capacity must sufficient to supply all flight deck occupants with adequate oxygen for defined period of time and altitude profiles specified in the applicable of National Aviation Authority. Regulations commonly the altitude profile will incorporate an emergency descent segment and followed by an period flight of altitude. A quantity gauge or other means determine the amount of available oxygen will be incorporated. If a LOX system installed, a LOX converter which facilitates the transformation of the oxygen from a liquid to gaseous state will be also installed. A regulator is installed to reduce storage cylinder to pressure to a usable level. Depending upon the aircraft, regulation can be constant flow of the lighter demand. Constant flow. The constant flow regulator provides the same output pressure or flow regardless of altitude. The regulator is therefore optimized for specific altitude. At altitudes lower than a designed optimum altitude, it will be provide more oxygen than actually required. This type of regulation is most often found in non-pressurized aircraft and portable oxygens. A single constant flow regulation is able to control the oxygen's flow to the all users. An oxygen mask provided at each flight deck station. The mask could be of the full face variety incorporating smoke goggles or a mouth and nose type goggles available separately. The mask at the pilot station will incorporate microphones allowed to internal and external communication. Masks are fitted to the face utilizing various suspensions harness for aircraft which routinely fly above 25,000 miles. In general, of the quick donning variety, it is designed to allow them to be put on 5 seconds or less than using one hand to often utilize oxygen system pressure to activate inflatable harness for quickly donning. Passenger compartment. In non-pressurized aircraft which routinely fly above 10,000 passengers, oxygen is typically provided by either fixed or portable system. Accidents and incidents, even held on the Skybrary and AI database, which include reference to oxygen system include July 2011, an oxygen fed fire started in the flight deck about Egypt and Air Boeing 77200 about the Department of Cairo with the most passengers boarded. And that's it. Thank you for listening.